be illegal for anyone outside of government-designated bodies to discuss, negotiate, do research on minimum wage. So that would, I mean, clearly undermine our work on wages. So and there were some other things regarding conflict resolution in Cambodia. And we, together with other brands, this time very much through the Ethical Trading Initiative in the UK, we engaged with the government and gave input, and we expressed clearly also, we came to them with a business perspective. We were saying basically, hey, if you do this, it's going to become more difficult for us. We will not be able to drive our sustainability commitments. There will be a brand reputation damage. And at the end of the day, it will have a negative impact on production, because workers will still have grievances, but you're taking away the mechanisms to resolve them, which will lead to strikes and so on, most likely. So, I mean, the short, or maybe not so short, but the answer to your question is that, I mean, we're very worried, and we have up until now, we've done quite a lot, but we've focused on areas related to the industry, to the fashion production in Cambodia, where we have an impact. I don't know, Frank, in terms of, from an ACT perspective?
Just adding up a few points. If you look at garment-producing countries which are big in the market, China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Myanmar, Cambodia, Turkey, I think your concerns about democracy are equally relevant for the other countries. Now, the next question is, what can you, from the outside, do to support and defend the space for workers to exercise their right of freedom of association and collective bargaining? I'm convinced that if we succeed to set up a corporation where trade unions play a key role to ensure a commitment of international brands to a country, there's no other more powerful way of defending and maintaining their space in a society, because they have a role and they have influence on something which also parts of the elites in these countries value very highly. So if the situation is that a signed collective bargaining agreement triggers commitment of a large number of international brands, that I think opens up space and defends space for trade unions in a way which maybe our, let's say, just policy demand, you should respect freedom of association, might not be able to do on its own. Now, what is the criteria for us? For us, it's fairly simple. So, Industrial, as a member of ACT, has lots of trade union affiliates in Cambodia. Some of them who are cooperating more closely with the government, some of them which are more with the opposition, some of them which are more independent. And for us, the criteria whether Cambodia is a country where we can pursue this is very simple. As long as the organization of the workers in the country feel it's worth doing it, it's worth doing it. It's not us to say you haven't sufficient democracy. It's up to them, in which we trust as representatives of the workers, whether they feel that process is still possible in the country. I would also be a bit careful with the word totalitarian. I think there are strong authoritarian tendencies in Cambodia, but having spent a lot of my working life in post-Soviet societies, I think there's a difference between an authoritarian regime like we have it in Cambodia in the moment and totalitarian societies. So I would just be a bit more careful with the words. Then your question, give us a deadline, give us a date when workers will get better wages because you have started this process. I won't give you that date. For the simple reason, if you want the local actors being in the driving process of a collective bargaining process, we cannot be at the same time say, you are in the driving seat, but we know that in 3 years you will have this result. I think what we did and what we're doing is trying to incentivize the national actors to be quick. So what we are basically saying is there's a commitment, as I said, of brands to stay in the country when there's a collective bargaining agreement. And we said, look, this commitment can be given till, in case from Cambodia, for example, till the end of 22. Now, and it starts when you sign a collective bargaining agreement. So it's in your hand that the benefits you can get from this collaboration are there for a longer period if you are able to agree quickly. So I think we are very clear we are not keen on dragging out that process forever. So we set incentives that they can consider to be fast, but we will not set a date because I think if you are serious about giving ownership to the people in the country, that would be dishonest in a way. Final point, what can you show how much wages have increased through your actions? As I think I described, we are in the process. We are trying to pioneer this in some countries. We don't have a collective bargaining agreement in place yet. I think it is a process. So if you say, is there a place where you can show there's an improvement, we are not there yet. But I think what we are contributing to is to say already now that a process where you have sustainable wage growth is encouraged, that helps to generate that space for negotiations. But look, I think you knew the answer of that part of your question yourself when you asked it. So.
Thank you, Frank. I believe we can take some questions from...
I had a question from the lady from Fair Wear Foundation as well.
So, quick, shortly, so that we can get to...
Okay, so take this down. You might want to Google it. We have something in place called Supplier Relationship Management System. There's a few pieces of information out there on it. In very short, it's how we work with our suppliers and how we manage the relationship and business relationship with the suppliers. It's a scale where we identify strategic suppliers, which are the ones who are top performing on 4 different criteria, being business and pricing, quality, logistics, and sustainability. There's an average score which we use to evaluate our suppliers. It's also followed up on twice a year with the top tier, we call them gold and platinum suppliers. It's evaluated twice a year in all these 4 parameters, and the top performance, we tie them closer to us by giving them longer business plans. So, I mean, yes, there are seasonal changes, for example, in terms of styles, but with a platinum supplier, we go into 5-year business plan. So it's not negotiation seasonally, but it's a 5-year commitment from us. So that's how, in very short, that's how sustainability comes in, and that's where the business alignment happens. So all these 4 areas are equally weighted.
So on the iPad, or rather on the app questions we've received, there is one for Sarah and there is one for Arne. If you could briefly address them. To Sarah, how do you think, how far does the transparency index go in the value chain? Up to which tier? What happens with, for example, raw materials production, where there are also huge sustainability issues? And then for Arne, what should the role for development cooperation be to push for greater progress in this space? Sarah.
Sure, this will be a quick answer. So we look for traceability at 3 different stages. We look for first-tier supplier list, so obviously that's typically where your clothes are assembled, the final stages of production, or cut, make, and trim. Some brands lists at that stage will also include subcontractors. Sometimes they consider that tier 2 or tier 3. Then we look for brands to publish processing facilities. Again, brands tend to define those slightly differently, either tier 2 or tier 3, but basically we're talking about the middle parts of production, so the dyeing, the finishing, the wet processing, that kind those kinds of activities. And then finally, we look for brands to be publishing their raw material suppliers. And this is the first year that one brand, who is ASOS, is publishing at least some of their raw suppliers, the ones who are supplying them viscose, which is the material they use the most of. And in terms of the other parts of the methodology, we don't differentiate between tiers, but we do look for some of the policies to be cascaded down the tiers of the supply chain.
Thank you, Sarah. Arne?
Well, there are different ways of how we have to be more consistent. In my situation, we have many trade situations, so it's development is also how we trade with these countries, and we have some trading instruments that, like everything but arms, we're doing with Bangladesh, but also GSP+. And here we have to be more consistent to not having, in some countries, like in Bangladesh, for example, production areas for export. So the standards have to be required for all people who live in the country. And it was interesting, when we visited Bangladesh, the business was actually encouraging that. So the business is not running against it. The government is challenging that, and people being invited or being involved by the parliament in Bangladesh. And so that is an important point. So we have to be more straight on that one, and also having results on ILO standards and really asking to get them. Otherwise, we have to evaluate if we keep this trade processes. So that is an important tool. Besides that, really taking up the OECD standards, and I would like to involve it as a Clean Clothes campaign, but also Industrial All calls up. It's not only on developing and other countries we are working with, but also inside Europe. So SDGs requires also the situation for the European Union member states, like Romania and others, but also like states who would like to be a member of the European Union, and other states like Bosnia and others who are not in the process yet. So that also requires an important part. And if we are consistent in that regard, and if we are walking towards the OECD guidance together on textile and footwear, we would be on a new state. And that needs to be processed on a legal framework for the businesses through the multi-stakeholder approach.
So, I have one question to each one of the panelists to be answered in Twitter style, so not even 1 minute. And the question is, what's the one achievement you would like to see? What's the one change you would like to see towards more sustainable fashion value chains? And let me start with Frank.
Well, I want to see a change from a game without rules to other rules of the game, where we have binding rules, be it through legislation, through collective bargaining agreement, which sets the floor. Because if we just set on voluntary initiatives and we don't change the rules of the games, I think we are too limited in our ambitions, and we won't see the change we want to see.
That's clear. Twitter style. Sarah?
You literally stole my answer. I even wrote it down. That's my answer. I think, it's such a tough question because so many different things need to change. And I don't think there's a silver bullet solution. But the thing that's going to make the biggest difference is really to change the rules of the system and to make sure that those better rules are properly enforced. So I think, with that being said, for us, I think one policy intervention that could really change the game in Europe is mandatory due diligence and reporting at the EU level. And we've seen examples from like Better Factories Cambodia, the Better Work Program, the Accord, of course, where when assessment information is being publicly disclosed, it's helping to drive improvements in working conditions. And I think that's the sort of culture we need to aim for. So requiring companies to find out what's going on in their supply chains and then report on it would, I think, open up some really interesting closed doors and really help move the needle forward, so that it's not just brands like H&M, it's all those other brands who are kind of dragging their feet, not disclosing anything, and maybe don't even have a policy in place.
So, mandatory due diligence from Sarah. Arne?
As I said in my first speech in the European Parliament, let's bring the national initiatives to a European flagship initiative, as there was a wish by the Commission to act so. Let's make it happen with the swing of the Parliament, with our report, to have a legal framework which has been set up by a multi-stakeholder platform, as we see by other countries. It's possible, so we have to move towards that way, but also taking action ourselves, doing public procurement, from the European level to the local level, and starting ourselves, like I'm wearing a Fair Foundation suit by a German company. So let's make it happen. Public procurement in the EU institutions, as we call it for it. We have acted on tea and coffee in the European Parliament and the institutions. Let's make it happen also in the EU. This is up to us. And all come to the fashion show we are doing from the S&D in autumn, where we learn more about sustainable, ethical, and good clothing.
Thank you so much. So from the national to the European, Jonna.
I want to see every employee in the H&M supply chain earn a living wage, and I want that living wage to be reached through a process of collective bargaining, because I think, well, we think that will achieve two things. I mean, on a workplace level, I mean, this process of collective bargaining, which of course also should happen, which is the ambition of ACT on an industry level, but on a workplace, on a factory level, that will empower, in our case, 60% of the total workforce, which are women, also to directly affect the conditions of the work. It will empower them. It will help them address and mitigate harassment, violence, and so on. So it's very much about empowering workers and giving them a voice, and putting them, like Frank put it, putting them in the driver's seat of the process. On a larger scale, I mentioned a freedom of association and a living wage is one of these enabling rights. If people are empowered and if they earn a living wage, a host of other human rights will also be realized in society on a wider level.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to you, dear audience. We would like to summarize our discussion in 3 points. First of all, we have a long way to go. Secondly, we need to do it collectively. We need to work more on women's empowerment, on decent work, living wage, and transparency and traceability. I do believe that industry should take a big bulk of the responsibility, and there is a lot to be done. But also we need to be reminded that unless we consumers, start behaving in a sustainable way, there is an even more long way to go. So please allow us to make a pledge to all of you. Let's spread what you heard today here. I think it's a very good way to start the EDDs with garment. This was an initiative that was very close to the heart of our commissioner. It was his priority, and we believe that we should never allow Rana Plaza to happen again. And please share all our thoughts on the web and Twitter, and Arantxa will tell you where you can still go to learn more about garment.
So there is this issue of garment, sustainable garment, that is, will be a red thread through the European Development Days. You have a lab debate on transparency and traceability today at 4:15 in D2. There is a lab on empowering women workers in the garment industry in Myanmar in room S tomorrow, and there is a stand in the EDD village, stand 33, that CARE International is hosting, presenting its actions on garment. So with that, let me thank the panelists. I personally also want to thank the European Commission and the European Parliament for taking a bit of leadership on this issue. At the end of the day, someone has to take the lead for change to happen on the ground, and to encourage, obviously, business and civil society to keep on pushing business and the European Commission and the European Parliament, national governments, to make sure we do not just simply have good words, but we translate them into action. Thank you very much. Big applause for the panel, please.
Thank you.